come back to the feeling of presence. The feeling of ourselves being here, aware and attentive. Practicing, in a sense, what I'd love to share with you all today. The topic for today being the power of presence. And I'd love to explore today maybe a few ways of being present and the effect of presence in our lives and the lives of others. I'd love to start us off with this quote from Thich Nhat Hanh, a Vietnamese Buddhist monk who was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And he goes, "The most precious gift we can offer others is our presence. When mindfulness embraces those we love, they will bloom like flowers." I'm going to repeat that again. The most precious gift we can offer others is our presence. When mindfulness embraces those we love, they will bloom like flowers. When we bring mindfulness to our interactions, this cultivates a sense of awareness of ourselves, awareness of others, awareness of our own condition and others' condition. When we're mindful of and aware of what's going on internally and with others, this creates space for understanding, empathy, and compassion. Now, what does it mean to be present? I thought I'd share a few ways that I connect with being present. The first one being physically present in a space, whether it's you sitting here physically in your room, or meditation hall, in your home, or being physically present in your neighborhood, in the community, virtually, although we're not physically there. But our image pops up right on the screen. So it's almost as if we are physically present in a certain space. We can consider being present emotionally, being aware of how we are internally with our feelings, our emotions, how we, almost like our heart. We can think of it as being present mentally, right? Like, let's say you just woke up and you're still a little groggy. Maybe you're not fully there mentally yet. Or if we are discombobulated, we're doing 10 things at once and our mind, someone's talking to us, and asking us a question, but we're not there mentally yet because we're still thinking about something else. And maybe that is a form of mental presence. And being mentally present, meaning being aware and being able to have those cognitive faculties available to us in that moment. And we can also be aware spiritually. And by spiritually, I'm taking it to mean being aware of our values, our intentions, and the moral frameworks within which we'd like to operate. And so I'd like to offer these kind of as a way of thinking about being present in these different ways. And I'd love to hear if you have other thoughts about what it means to you and the different ways we can show up and be present. And we can also consider present not just as a static state, say sitting here on a meditation cushion, or sitting alone, and considering it maybe as a passive practice, an internal practice. But we can also consider it as an active presence. And when we talk about being this as an active presence, we're thinking about the way that we think about engaging with the world, and also the way that we do be present and act in this world. So both of these ways, a more internalized process versus and maybe non-physical action oriented action presence, but also as an active one where action is involved. So when we think about engaging with others, engaging with the world, we might think that we have to do these big projects, right? That we have to involve ourselves in big initiatives to make the world a better place. And we have a lot of big issues to deal with, like ecological destruction, systemic racism, systemic poverty, prison industrial complex, war, different forms of suffering that we have inflicted on ourselves and on each other. And when we consider these big changes that we feel we need to have in this world, and have the feeling that time is running out, we might feel a sense of despair or hopelessness. Can little old me really make a difference? There's thousands and millions and billions of people doing otherwise. So, I'm just a small me in this big world. But as the Dalai Lama has said, if you think you're too small to make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito. So we aren't too small to make a difference. And now what I'd like to emphasize and share with you all today is the power of presence. And that just showing up can be enough. Instead of thinking about it in terms of, okay, I need to be involved with these big projects to make a difference. Just showing up can be the difference, can create that difference. That can be enough. And I wanted to share with you all today a very personal example and experience that has really highlighted to me this idea. And I wanted to share first the story of what happened when people just showed up. So this is an example. Let's see, of how people showing up in their neighborhood was able to shift the levels of violence in the neighborhood. So let me see if I can pull up this story. So this was a community-driven initiative to counter the violence that people were seeing in Minneapolis. And this is, so people were pulling up their lawn chairs in Minneapolis, in a neighborhood that had growing violence. What ended up being 21 days of peace, an event that was developed, was simply people bringing up a lawn chair, sitting down in their neighborhood, and just being present. And what they saw was that simply being out there with their chairs and just sitting down made a big difference. They didn't have to do anything to prevent, to counteract the violence. But the act of being visible was enough to prevent and reduce the incidence of violence in their community. They called it, what they ended up saying, labeling this, was violence interruption. And I wanted to share with you a personal story of the power of just showing up. So this past week, for the past 5 days, from Sunday to just this yesterday, Friday, I had the honor of co-facilitating a meditation retreat at the Omega Institute in upstate New York with the Harlem Wellness Center. And this retreat was the culmination of a full year and a half of these group of ladies coming together from the Harlem community virtually during the pandemic to meditate together 2 times a week, where I led the meditation sessions. And we saw during this pandemic that during these 45 minutes, 2 times a week, we were available. There was no session that we didn't do. People showed up. I showed up. And maybe there was one person, one day, maybe there were 6 or 8 people another day. We each showed up. And there was a trust that was developed just by seeing a familiar face, meeting a new person, joining for the first time, and then seeing them again. And so we all went to this retreat together this week due to the trust that was developed by us simply showing up together and interacting in very small but significant ways. Just by saying hi, how are you, in the few minutes before the meditation, and sometimes a few minutes lingering after. So during this retreat experience, we showed up with our whole selves. We, in the experience from many of the women who joined, for them, this was one of the few times in their lives where they felt safe. And as Black women, this was especially meaningful to feel safe. And we created this space where people could listen, to hear each other, to open up, to share, but not in a forced way, but really just through our genuine, just by being there and our genuine intention to look after one another on this trip. Whether that meant, during lunch, we're like, oh, can I take your plate? Or, oh, where is, this person before we leave somewhere? And so there's this level of trust that comes up just by us showing up. And so it doesn't have to be a retreat experience where we have a very intimate, dedicated time together. But we can also think to the times when we're just walking around, being visible in our neighborhood. When you go out, especially if you go out at regular times, you might see people hanging out, going about their lives, kind of the regulars in your neighborhood. Maybe that's going to the grocery store and seeing the same employee, or your coffee shop, or the guy who sits on the corner, the person who's your neighbor who's sitting on the stoop. And you might not have a close relationship, you may not even talk to them, but just by them being there and existing in a peaceful, non-threatening way has impact. And sometimes you might notice, oh, that person's usually there. Where are they? Even if you don't interact with them directly. And so I wanted to share a practice which we've listened, most of us have probably heard before, as a way of showing up. And this practice is the practice of deep listening. The Zen teacher Jan Chosen Bays explains this practice beautifully. And she suggests, listen to other people as if you were a sponge, soaking up whatever the other person says. Let the mind be quiet and just take it in. Don't formulate any response in the mind until a response is requested or obviously needed. So it's the practice of listening to someone without the intention to respond, which is what often happens. Right? I have an opinion on that. Once they finish, I'm going to share. But as we're developing your own opinion, we're not fully listening and understanding what the other person is saying. And this practice of deep listening, which she calls also absorptive listening, doesn't quite come naturally to most people. And she talks about how many people notice when they're practicing deep listening, the presence of an inner attorney, a mental voice that says, hurry up and finish talking so I can tell you what I think, which then interferes with this tranquil and very attentive listening. And during this practice, we often become aware of how many times, even in just 1 minute, where we check out. Well, when someone else is talking, our mind maybe flickers off to our shopping list, grocery list, or our plans for the day. lunch is coming up. What am I going to have? Or maybe we just, as someone's talking to us, we notice some movement and, we shift our awareness to that, or we notice a sound, like, oh, what's the cause of that sound? So we start to become aware of these things that we do very commonly, even as we're engaging with someone else. And so this practice of deep listening is a practice of just starting to sit back and not be involved and allowing the other person to share. It is an act of witnessing the other person's experience. And this act of witnessing can be, if not the most thing, one of the most important things that we can do for each other as humanity. Most, if not the majority of our problems, comes from not connecting to others and witnessing others or allowing that to happen. So in this sense, with deep listening, we are, as Jan Chosen-Bay says, resting in this moment. We have no agenda for or against what is happening. So this is one very practical skill that we can develop to allow for us to be fully present with this moment and also specifically with other people. It is an act of mindful. It is a very mindful practice that doesn't come easy, but with experience and with skill, we can train ourselves to become more aware bit by bit. It allows us to be in the present moment, which is actually the only moment we have to live. We can only act in the present, not the past or the future. And when we can be present to the current experience of our lives, we can more fully understand what it is that we find ourselves in. And there's a fullness and richness of experience that we encounter in the moment. And now this is one of those things where you might have heard this over and over again, right? Yeah, savor the moment, be in the present moment. But I'd like to encourage us to practice this. Right? There's an understanding that can only come, like a deeper understanding that can only come when we actually experience it for ourselves. And so I'd like to offer this practice of deep listening as a way that we can cultivate this greater presence within ourselves and with others. Because when we can interact and act with ourselves and others with mindfulness and awareness, there's the greater possibility to act with kindness and act in ways that reduce the ways we harm ourselves and others. With presence, we knowingly or unknowingly create community. The fact that you all have showed up today has meaning. You might not know it. You might just think, okay, I'm in my little, space virtually. But the fact that you're here has created a community. And we can start by simply showing up and being present. So I'd love to leave that at that and give this time